before anyone realized it wasn't part of the orchestra. Crystal glasses shattered, guests screamed, and a violinist froze with his bow suspended in the air. At the center of the room stood a woman in a white wedding dress, the train stained with drops of crimson that weren't hers. One trembling hand held a pistol while the other gripped the wrist of the man everyone in South Korea feared. Kang Ji-ho, chairman of the Han Syndicate, the man prosecutors had chased for 12 years without a single conviction, and the man she had been sent to destroy. His black tuxedo was soaked with blood where a bullet had torn through his shoulder, yet he wasn't looking at the armed guards surrounding them, the police flooding through the cathedral doors, or even the gun pointed at his chest. His eyes never left hers. "You lied to me," he whispered. Her fingers tightened around the pistol. "So did you." Silence swallowed the ballroom. Even the police hesitated. The commissioner stepped forward and shouted, "Detective Han Seorin, step away from him." A wave of shocked gasps spread through the guests. "Detective?" Every head turned toward the bride. Ji-ho didn't move. His expression barely changed, but the pain in his eyes said everything. It wasn't anger or fear. It was heartbreak. "You were never mine," he said softly. Tears welled in Han Seorin's eyes as she replied, "I wish that were true." Just then, a phone vibrated inside Ji-ho's jacket. It buzzed once, then again, and again. Han Seorin slowly reached into his pocket and pulled it out. An unknown sender had delivered a single video attachment with no message. Her hands shook as she pressed play. Within seconds, the color drained from her face. "No," she whispered. Ji-ho frowned. "What is it?" She couldn't answer. The video showed someone she had buried 3 years ago standing alive beside the real mastermind behind everything. If you enjoy stories filled with impossible love, dangerous secrets, shocking betrayals, and emotional twists that keep you guessing until the very end, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's go back to where it all began. 8 months earlier, rain washed over the neon streets of Seoul, turning every reflection into a blur of blue and red. Detective Han Seorin adjusted the collar of her black coat as she entered the National Intelligence Bureau's underground briefing room. At 29, she had built a reputation as one of the Bureau's finest investigators. She was patient, brilliant, impossible to corrupt, and willing to risk everything for justice. Tonight, however, something felt different. The director himself waited inside, with a thick file resting on the table. There was no name on it, only a photograph of a man stepping from a black sedan wearing a tailored charcoal suit. His broad shoulders and unreadable dark eyes radiated quiet authority. "Do you know who this is?" the director asked. Han Seorin studied the picture before shaking her head. "No? Good," he replied as he slid another file toward her. "His name is Kang Ji-ho. The police call him a businessman, the courts call him untouchable, the underworld calls him chairman, and the people who disappear because of him never call him anything again." Han Seorin remained calm. "What do you need from me?" The director leaned forward. "We've tried surveillance, wiretaps, financial investigations, and undercover agents. Every operation has failed because someone inside this bureau is exposing our people." The words settled heavily in the room. There was a traitor within their own ranks. "We don't know who we can trust anymore," he continued. "That's why we're sending someone whose name has never appeared in any investigation connected to Kang Ji-ho. You." He handed her a slim envelope containing a brand new identity. Her new name would be Yoon Ara, an art conservator recently returned from Florence with no family and a carefully manufactured past. "Your mission is simple," the director said. "Get close to Kang Ji-ho, find evidence against him, and when the time comes, bring down the entire Han Syndicate." Han Seorin accepted the envelope without hesitation, but before she left, the director stopped her. "There's one more thing." He opened another folder containing 6 photographs, 6 smiling undercover officers. Across every picture, one word had been stamped in red ink: deceased. "Every one of them believed they were smarter than him," the director said quietly. "Don't make the same mistake." Thunder rolled across the city as Han Seorin stepped back into the rain, unaware that somewhere across Seoul, Kang Ji-ho stood on the rooftop of his headquarters staring at a photograph of the woman he had never met. Her photograph. Beside him, an older man smiled and said, "She's accepted the assignment." Ji-ho didn't look surprised. Instead, he calmly asked, "How long before she realizes she was chosen because someone wanted her to meet me?" The old man offered no answer. Far below, Han Seorin disappeared into the crowded streets, while, hidden in the shadows, a traitor inside the bureau made a phone call. "She's in," the voice whispered. A calm reply came from the other end. "Good. This time, we'll make sure neither of them walks away alive." 3 days later, Han Seorin no longer existed. From that moment on, she became Yoon Ara, a respected art conservator who had supposedly spent the last 6 years restoring priceless paintings across Europe before returning to Seoul. Every document in her handbag was genuine enough to survive government inspection. Every photograph on her phone had been carefully created. Every school record, every tax payment, every travel history had been manufactured by the Bureau. It was the perfect identity. Too perfect. Real people left messy footprints. Fake people didn't. That thought lingered in the back of her mind as she stepped through the entrance of the Han Seorin Museum, where South Korea's wealthiest families had gathered for an exclusive charity exhibition featuring several priceless paintings from Kang Ji-ho's private collection. The Bureau had spent months arranging this single meeting. If everything went according to plan, she would spend 10 minutes with the country's most untouchable crime boss. If she impressed him, those 10 minutes might become something much bigger. Hidden throughout the museum were undercover officers disguised as journalists, donors, museum staff, and guests. None of them acknowledged one another. None of them looked in her direction. That was the rule. If one identity collapsed, the entire operation would die with it. Suddenly, the room became strangely quiet. Conversations faded. Camera flashes exploded. Every eye turned toward the entrance. Kang Ji-ho had arrived. He wasn't loud. He didn't demand attention. He simply walked into the room wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, followed by only 4 security men. Yet somehow, everyone instinctively stepped aside. There was something unnerving about him. He didn't scan the room like someone expecting danger. He moved like someone who had already calculated every possible threat before entering. His dark eyes swept across the gallery only once before settling briefly on Era. She resisted the urge to look away too quickly. A second later, the museum curator hurried over with an eager smile. "Chairman Kang, I'd like you to meet Miss Yoon Ara, the conservator I mentioned." Ji-ho extended his hand. "I've heard you're exceptionally good." Ara shook his hand with steady confidence. "I've heard you're exceptionally difficult to impress." For the first time, a faint smile appeared on his face. "Then perhaps today will disappoint one of us." Before she could answer, he gestured toward an enormous landscape painting hanging beneath the spotlight. "Tell me what everyone else missed." Several respected art historians stood nearby. Their expressions suggested they had already completed their analysis. Era slowly approached the painting instead of rushing toward it. She examined the brushwork, the aging of the canvas, and the reflection of the varnish beneath the lights. Nearly a minute passed before she finally spoke. "The painting itself is authentic, but the lower border isn't. It was restored using modern pigments around 20 years ago. Whoever performed the restoration was highly skilled, but they couldn't perfectly recreate the mineral composition used during the Joseon dynasty." Silence spread through the room. One of the historians frowned. Another immediately stepped closer to inspect the area she indicated. Within seconds, disbelief spread across their faces. The curator swallowed nervously. "Our records. There was an undocumented restoration after a warehouse fire." Ji-ho never looked at the painting again. He looked only at Ara. "Interesting. The truth usually is," she replied. "Most people stop looking once they're satisfied with the first answer." Something unreadable passed through his eyes. Respect, curiosity, or perhaps caution. Before either of them could continue, a deafening crash echoed through the gallery. A massive bronze sculpture broke loose from its display and tipped toward a group of elderly guests. Panic erupted. People scattered in every direction. Ji-ho didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the falling sculpture and shoved an elderly woman out of its path just before the metal slammed into the marble floor. The impact shattered the pedestal, sending razor-sharp fragments across the room. One piece sliced deeply across Ji-ho's forearm. Blood immediately stained the sleeve of his white shirt. Security surrounded him within seconds, but Ara was already beside him. She removed a clean linen cloth from her handbag and pressed it firmly against the wound. One of his bodyguards stepped forward aggressively. "Don't touch the chairman." Ji-ho calmly raised his free hand. "Stand down." The guard obeyed instantly. Ara continued applying pressure. "You need stitches." Ji-ho glanced at the blood soaking through the cloth. "I've survived worse." "That doesn't mean you should ignore this." For a brief moment they simply looked at one another while the chaos continued around them. Then Ji-ho smiled, almost imperceptibly. "Do you always argue with people you've just met?" "Only the stubborn ones." A quiet laugh escaped him. His security team exchanged surprised glances. It was obvious they weren't used to hearing their boss laugh. As paramedics arrived, Ara noticed something unusual beneath the shattered sculpture. A tiny metallic object, no larger than a coin, had rolled beneath the broken pedestal. She instinctively moved toward it, but one of Ji-ho's senior bodyguards reached it first. He picked it up quickly and slipped it into his pocket before anyone else could see. More importantly, he made sure Ji-ho didn't see it. Ara noticed. Ji-ho didn't. That single detail stayed with her for the rest of the evening. Someone close to Kang Ji-ho was hiding evidence from him. Back at her apartment, she encrypted her report and transmitted it directly to bureau headquarters. She documented every conversation, every expression, every observation, including the mysterious device hidden by the bodyguard. Less than 5 minutes later, her secure phone rang. The director's voice was unusually cold. "Delete the last section of your report." Seorin frowned. "Which section?" "The part about the metallic device." "Why?" "Someone inside his own security detail concealed evidence." "That's not your concern." "It became my concern the moment I saw it." There was a long silence before the director finally spoke again. "Detective, your assignment is Kang Ji-ho. Nothing else. Delete it." The line went dead. Seorin stared at the phone. Her instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. The bureau wanted Ji-ho imprisoned, so why would they ignore evidence that might expose someone close to him? Before she could process the thought, another message appeared on her encrypted device. It contained no sender, no number, no traceable origin. Only one sentence. "Stop looking beneath fallen things, detective." Every muscle in her body tightened. She had never used her real name since beginning the operation. Only a handful of people inside the bureau knew Ara was actually Detective Han Seorin. Someone had discovered her identity. The only question was whether that person intended to protect her or make sure she became the 7th undercover officer who never came home. The anonymous message stayed with Seorin for the next 2 days. She replayed it in her mind every chance she got. Stop looking beneath fallen things, detective." It wasn't just the words that unsettled her, it was the certainty behind them. Someone knew exactly who she was, yet instead of exposing her, they had chosen to warn her. She spent hours tracing the message through every encrypted system the Bureau had access to, but it was as though it had never existed. No sender, no digital fingerprint, no location, nothing. Whoever had sent it understood surveillance better than the Bureau itself. Before she could make sense of it, another assignment landed on her desk. It wasn't from headquarters. It was a handwritten invitation from Kang Ji-ho himself. He was hosting a private dinner at his estate for a small group of guests who had contributed to the museum exhibition, and he had specifically requested Ara's presence. When the director read the invitation, a rare smile crossed his face. "This is the opportunity we've been waiting for. Get inside his home. Learn his routines. Gain his trust. Whatever you do, don't waste this chance." Seorin accepted the assignment, but she couldn't ignore the feeling growing in the pit of her stomach. The same director who had ordered her to erase evidence now seemed unusually eager to push her closer to Ji-ho. She no longer knew whether she was hunting a criminal or walking into someone else's trap. Ji-ho's estate overlooked the Han River, hidden behind towering walls, private gardens, and enough security cameras to monitor every corner of the property. Yet the house itself surprised her. She expected displays of power and extravagance, but instead found quiet elegance. Shelves filled with rare books lined the walls. Historic paintings hung beside family photographs. Classical music drifted softly through the hallway. The house felt lived in, not staged. As she admired a centuries-old landscape painting near the entrance, an elderly woman approached with a warm smile. "You must be Miss Yoon," she said gently. "I'm Mrs. Park. I've looked after Chairman Kang since he was a child." Before Ara could respond, the woman straightened the collar of her jacket with motherly affection. "He doesn't smile very often, but don't mistake silence for coldness. He carries more than most people ever see." Before Seorin could ask what she meant, Mrs. Park excused herself to welcome another guest. Ji-ho entered the dining room a few moments later, wearing a simple black sweater instead of the expensive suits she had grown accustomed to seeing. Without the polished image of a businessman, he looked surprisingly ordinary, human. He pulled out a chair for her before taking his own seat. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Curiosity won," she replied honestly. He looked amused. "About the paintings?" She shook her head. "About the man who collects them." A faint smile touched his lips. "Most people think they've already figured me out before we even meet." "Have they?" she asked. "Usually." "And are they right?" He poured tea into her cup before answering. "That depends on who's telling the story. Throughout dinner, they spoke about history, architecture, travel, and forgotten artists. Ji-ho listened more than he spoke. When he asked questions, he genuinely wanted answers. There was no arrogance in him, only patience. The more time Seorin spent with him, the more uncomfortable she became. Nothing about him matched the ruthless criminal described in her case files. Either he was the greatest actor she had ever encountered, or someone had carefully constructed a version of him that wasn't entirely true. Halfway through dinner, the lights suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed the room so completely that for a moment no one moved. Then emergency alarms began echoing through the estate. Security guards rushed into the dining room, hands already reaching for concealed weapons. "Chairman, stay where you are," one of them ordered. Ji-ho ignored the instruction and stepped toward the hallway just as the emergency lights flickered on, bathing the house in a dim red glow. A sharp crack echoed from upstairs. It sounded like a gunshot. Every guard sprinted toward the staircase. Ji-ho turned to Ara. "Stay here." She met his eyes. "I'm not very good at following orders." For the first time that evening, he laughed softly. "I noticed." Without waiting for permission, she followed several steps behind the security team. They reached the second floor to find one of the guards unconscious on the carpet, with a tranquilizer dart lodged in his neck. Nearby, a reinforced steel safe stood wide open. The room showed no signs of forced entry. Drawers remained untouched. Jewelry still rested inside velvet boxes. Cash was exactly where it belonged. It looked as though whoever had entered hadn't come to steal anything. While the guards searched every corner of the room, Seorin noticed a single photograph lying face down beneath the edge of the safe. She quietly picked it up before anyone else noticed. It showed a much younger Ji-ho standing beside a smiling woman and a little girl with bright eyes and shoulder-length hair. They looked like an ordinary family, enjoying an ordinary afternoon. On the back of the photograph, written in faded blue ink, were 3 words that instantly tightened her chest. "Find my daughter." "What are you holding?" Ji-ho's voice came quietly from behind her. She turned slowly and handed him the photograph. The calm expression she had come to know disappeared from his face. He stared at the image as though it had reached him from another lifetime. "I thought this was destroyed," he whispered. "Who is she?" Ara asked gently, nodding toward the little girl. Ji-ho's fingers tightened around the photograph. "Someone I failed." "Your daughter?" He remained silent for several seconds before answering. "The world believes she died. And what do you believe?" His eyes never left the photograph. "I believe someone wanted me to stop looking." Before Seorin could ask another question, one of the bodyguards hurried into the room. "Chairman, we've searched the entire estate. Every gate remained locked. Every camera was functioning. No intruders entered the property." Ji-ho looked up slowly. "Then whoever opened my safe." The bodyguard finished the sentence for him. "Never had to enter because they're already one of us." Silence filled the room. Seorin felt the weight of those words settle deep inside her. There was a traitor inside Ji-ho's organization, just as there was one inside the bureau. Neither side knew who they could trust anymore. Later that night, after returning to her apartment, Seorin secretly searched every government database she could access for the woman and little girl from the photograph. Nothing appeared. No birth certificates, no school records, no missing persons report. It was as if the child had never existed. Then one final search produced something even more disturbing. The woman in the photograph wasn't a stranger. Seorin had seen her face before inside a classified bureau file connected to a failed operation from years earlier. According to official records, that woman had died 7 years before the family photograph could possibly have been taken. Someone had falsified government records. Someone had erased an entire child from existence. And for the first time since accepting the mission, Seorin found herself asking a question she never imagined she would. What if Kang Ji-ho wasn't the monster she had been sent to destroy? What if the real enemy had been hiding behind her own badge all along? Sleep became impossible after that night. Seorin lay awake, replaying every conversation she had ever had with Kang Ji-ho, comparing the man she had met with the man described in the Bureau's files. The 2 versions refused to become one. The reports painted him as ruthless, calculating, and incapable of compassion. Yet the man she had seen had risked his own life to save a stranger beneath a falling sculpture, treated his staff with quiet respect, and carried the grief of a missing child like a wound that had never healed. One of them was a lie. She just didn't know which one. The following morning, before she could organize her thoughts, another message appeared on her secure phone. This one came directly from Ji-ho's office. Chairman Kang requests your assistance in authenticating several historical documents at the Han Seorin Foundation. Transportation has been arranged. It wasn't a request she could refuse. The Bureau encouraged her to accept immediately. The closer you get, the sooner we end this, the director reminded her. His words sounded rehearsed. Han Seorin simply nodded, but deep inside, a quiet voice kept asking whether the Bureau wanted justice or merely wanted Ji-ho eliminated. The Han Seorin Foundation occupied the top 3 floors of one of Seoul's tallest buildings. Unlike Ji-ho's corporate headquarters, the foundation focused entirely on education, medical research, and scholarships for children who had lost their parents. Seorin walked through hallways filled with photographs of students, volunteers, hospitals, and community projects. She stopped in front of a large display showing thousands of children's names engraved on polished glass. Every name here belongs to someone whose education was funded anonymously, a voice said behind her. She turned to find Ji-ho standing a few steps away. Anonymous? She asked. He nodded. Children shouldn't have to feel indebted just because someone decided to help them. She looked back at the wall. No one ever mentioned this in the reports. People usually write about the things they want others to remember, he replied quietly, not the things that complicate the story. As they entered the archive room, Ji-ho placed several aged documents on a large wooden table. These belong to my grandfather, he explained. I want to preserve them before time destroys what's left. Seorin carefully unfolded the first document, but before she could examine it, her attention shifted to an old family photograph tucked inside the folder. It showed Ji-ho as a teenager, standing beside the same little girl she had seen in the picture from the safe. This time, someone had written a date beneath it. The date immediately caught her attention. According to Bureau records, the child had supposedly died 6 months before this photograph was taken. The timeline was impossible. She kept her expression calm, but inside, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Someone had been rewriting history for years. Their conversation was interrupted when Ji-ho's assistant hurried into the room. Chairman, we've located the accountant. Ji-ho's expression hardened for the first time that day. Alive? The assistant hesitated. Barely. Ji-ho looked towards Seorin. I'm afraid our meeting will have to continue another time. Curiosity got the better of her. Who is the accountant? Ji-ho studied her for a moment before answering. A man who handled charitable donations for the foundation. 3 days ago, he disappeared with financial records worth hundreds of millions of won. This morning, someone left him outside a hospital. Was he robbed? Ji-ho slowly shook his head. No, he was tortured. Before Seorin could respond, Ji-ho's phone rang. He answered without looking at the screen. The calm in his voice vanished almost immediately. Repeat that. A long silence followed. Don't move him, he ordered. I'm coming. He ended the call and turned toward his security chief. Someone murdered the accountant. Every person in the room froze. The hospital just called, Ji-ho continued. He regained consciousness for less than 30 seconds before someone disconnected his life support. Seorin watched the reactions around the room. Most of the staff looked horrified. One man didn't. Standing quietly near the doorway, senior bodyguard Choi Min-jae lowered his eyes for only a fraction of a second. But it was enough. She recognized the expression instantly. It wasn't grief. It was relief. Hours later, Seorin secretly reviewed surveillance footage obtained through the Bureau. Something strange appeared moments before the accountant's death. A hospital maintenance worker had entered the intensive care unit carrying a toolbox. 3 minutes later, he walked out without it. His face was hidden beneath a surgical mask, but one detail stood out. On his left wrist was the exact same tattoo Seorin had noticed on Choi Min-jae when he picked up the mysterious metal device after the museum incident. The same man had been present at both events. Before she could submit the discovery, her phone rang again. It was the director. Have you found anything useful? He asked. Possibly, she replied cautiously. I think someone close to Ji-ho is eliminating witnesses. There was a pause. Forget the bodyguard. Sir, he keeps appearing wherever evidence disappears. Your mission isn't his security team. Then whose mission is it? Silence. Then the director answered in a colder tone than ever before. You're becoming emotionally involved. That's dangerous. I'm following the evidence. No, he replied. You're questioning your orders. The call ended before she could answer. That evening, unable to ignore her instincts any longer, Seorin left her apartment and drove toward the hospital where the accountant had died. The room had already been cleaned, but one nurse agreed to speak off the record. The patient kept repeating one sentence before he died, she whispered nervously. What did he say? Seorin asked. The nurse looked around to make sure no one was listening. He kept saying, "Tell Chairman Kang, the raven is inside the nest." Seorin frowned. The raven? The nurse nodded. That's all he managed to say before someone pulled the fire alarm. When we returned, he was dead. As Seorin walked back toward the parking lot, she suddenly realized she wasn't alone. A black sedan sat beneath a flickering streetlight across the road. Its engine was running. The driver's windows slowly rolled down. Ji-ho was sitting inside. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, he broke the silence. "You've been asking questions that place you in danger." She felt her heartbeat quicken. "How do you know where I've been?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite understand. "Because someone has been following you since yesterday." Her eyes widened. "Who?" Ji-ho looked into the darkness beyond the hospital entrance. "If I knew that," he said quietly, "I wouldn't be afraid for you." For the first time since this mission began, Seorin wasn't sure which side was trying to protect her, and which side wanted her dead. The answer, she feared, would change everything. Seorin stood frozen beside her car, as Ji-ho's words echoed through her mind. "Someone has been following you since yesterday." She searched his face for any sign of manipulation, but all she found was quiet concern. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked cautiously. Ji-ho rested one hand on the steering wheel without breaking eye contact. "Because whoever they're watching," he said softly, "they're waiting for the right moment to stop watching and start acting." Before she could ask another question, headlights appeared at the end of the street. Ji-ho glanced toward them, his expression instantly sharpening. "Get in your car," he said. "Go home. Don't take the same route twice." "Ji-ho, go." His tone left no room for argument. Seconds later, his sedan disappeared into the night, leaving Seorin standing alone with more questions than answers. Instead of driving home, she checked her mirrors every few minutes and deliberately changed directions 5 times. 20 minutes later, she noticed the same silver SUV appear behind her for the 3rd time. It kept a careful distance, never attempting to overtake her. Her pulse quickened. Ji-ho had been telling the truth. Someone was following her. She took a sudden turn into an underground parking garage, switched off her headlights, and waited. The SUV rolled slowly past the entrance before stopping. 2 men stepped out. Both wore dark jackets and baseball caps. One raised a photograph beneath the garage lights. Even from a distance, Seorin recognized the picture. It was her, not Yoon Ara, Han Seorin. They knew exactly who they were hunting. She quietly slipped through a maintenance exit before the men reached her location and disappeared into the maze of narrow streets behind the building. Back inside her apartment, she immediately contacted the Bureau's Emergency Operations Center. No one answered. She tried the director directly. His phone was switched off. That had never happened before. Frustrated, she accessed the Bureau's secure server using an emergency authentication code reserved for undercover agents. Instead of the usual login screen, a red notification appeared across her monitor. "Access revoked. User credentials suspended." She stared at the screen in disbelief. Only 3 people had the authority to suspend her access, and one of them was the director. Without warning, she had been locked out of the very organization she served. At sunrise, she made a decision she never imagined she would make. She drove to Ji-ho's headquarters. His security team immediately surrounded her vehicle. But before anyone could question her, Ji-ho stepped out of the building. "Let her through," he ordered. Inside his private office, Seorin placed her bureau identification on the desk. "My cover has been compromised," she admitted. "Someone inside my organization has suspended my access." Ji-ho looked at the badge without touching it. "When did you realize?" She frowned. "Realize what?" He walked toward the window overlooking the city. "That your own people stopped protecting you." Silence filled the room. Finally, Seorin asked the question she had been avoiding for weeks. "Did you know who I was from the beginning?" Ji-ho closed his eyes briefly before answering. "Yes." Her heart sank. "Since when?" "From the day you walked into the museum." She took a step backward. "Then why didn't you expose me?" He slowly turned to face her. "Because I wasn't afraid of who you were." His voice was calm, almost painfully honest. "I was afraid of why they sent you." Before Seorin could respond, Ji-ho unlocked a drawer and placed a thick file on the table between them. "Open it." Inside were surveillance photographs taken over several months. Every picture showed Seorin long before she ever accepted the undercover assignment. She was leaving her apartment, visiting her father's grave, drinking coffee with colleagues, shopping alone. Someone had been watching her long before the mission began. Beneath the photographs was another document bearing the seal of the National Intelligence Bureau. Across the top of the page were two words that made her blood run cold. Operation Sparrow. Her own name appeared several times throughout the report, but she wasn't listed as the lead investigator. She was listed as the bait. Her hands began to tremble as she continued reading. The objective wasn't simply to infiltrate the Han Seorin syndicate. The objective was to place Detective Han Seorin close enough to Kang Ji-ho that both of them could be eliminated during the same operation. Her entire mission had been built on a lie. She looked up slowly. "Where did you get this?" Ji-ho answered without hesitation. "From someone inside your bureau who couldn't live with what they helped create." "Who?" "I promised I wouldn't reveal their name." She slammed the file shut. "How do I know this isn't forged?" Ji-ho reached into his jacket and handed her a small silver flash drive. "Because the original author recorded a confession before disappearing." Han Seorin inserted the drive into her laptop. A video began playing. The image was shaky, as though it had been recorded in a hurry. A middle-aged man wearing a bureau identification badge looked directly into the camera. "If anyone finds this," he said, "my name is Deputy Director Lee Sang-ho. Operation Sparrow was never about justice. We fabricated evidence against Kang Ji-ho because someone inside the government wanted control of the Han Seorin financial network. Detective Han Seorin was selected because she had the highest probability of gaining Ji-ho's trust. Once she succeeded, both targets would be eliminated, and the deaths blamed on an internal gang conflict." The recording suddenly cut to black. Neither of them spoke. The room felt impossibly quiet. Everything Seorin believed about her mission collapsed in a single moment. Ji-ho finally broke the silence. "Now you know why I never exposed you." She looked at him with tears forming in her eyes. "You knew they were using me?" He nodded. "Yes. You could have walked away. I tried. Why didn't you?" He gave a sad smile. "Because somewhere along the way," he paused, struggling to find the words, "you stopped being the detective who came to destroy me." Seorin held her breath. "Who did I become?" Ji-ho looked at her with complete honesty. "The only person who ever made me believe my life could be something other than survival." Before she could answer, an explosion shook the entire building. The windows shattered inward. Smoke poured through the office as alarms screamed across every floor. Security officers rushed into the room. "Chairman," one shouted, "the underground garage has been bombed." Another guard ran in only seconds later, his face drained of color. "Sir," he said breathlessly, "they've taken Mrs. Park." The room fell silent. Ji-ho didn't speak. He simply closed his eyes, because he knew exactly what it meant. The people hunting them had finally made their move, and they had taken the one person who knew every secret either of them had left. The sound of the explosion still echoed through the building as Ji-ho sprinted toward the elevators. Seorin stayed close behind while smoke filled the corridors, and frightened employees rushed toward the emergency exits. Security officers barked orders into their radios, but every report sounded worse than the last. The underground garage had been destroyed. 3 guards were dead. Several others were missing. Most alarming of all, the surveillance servers had been wiped clean. Whoever planned the attack hadn't come merely to kill. They had come to erase evidence. Outside, emergency vehicles flooded the streets, but Ji-ho barely looked at them. His entire focus remained on one name, Mrs. Park. The woman who had raised him after his parents died. The woman who knew every secret buried inside the Han Seorin family. If she had been taken alive, it wasn't for ransom. It was because someone believed she still knew something worth killing for. Minutes later, Ji-ho's phone vibrated. The caller ID showed no number. He answered without speaking. A distorted voice filled the silence. "If you ever want to see Mrs. Park again, come alone." Ji-ho's jaw tightened. "Where?" "You'll receive the location in 30 minutes. Bring the girl." The line disconnected. Seorin frowned. "They asked for me." Ji-ho nodded slowly. "This was never about money. It's about ending Operation Sparrow exactly the way it was designed." Before either of them could say another word, Seorin's own phone rang. She stared at the screen in disbelief. It was the director. She answered immediately. "Where are you?" he demanded. "Somewhere you can no longer control," she replied. His voice hardened. "Listen carefully. Kang Ji-ho is manipulating you. Bring him in now, and we can still fix this." Seorin laughed bitterly. "Fix it? You sent me to die. You don't understand the full picture." "Then explain it." A long silence followed before the director finally spoke. "Ji-ho's daughter is alive." Seorin felt the air leave her lungs. What? Ask him why he never found her. The call ended. She slowly turned toward Ji-ho. Your daughter. His face went pale. What did he say? He said she's alive. Ji-ho stood perfectly still. For years he had searched for a child everyone insisted was dead. Every investigation had led nowhere. Every witness had disappeared. Every record had been erased. He had almost forced himself to stop believing. Almost. If that's true, he whispered, then everything they've done has been to keep her hidden. 30 minutes later, another message arrived. It contained only an address, an abandoned shipyard on the outskirts of Incheon. Against every instinct, Ji-ho and Seorin went together. Neither trusted the other to go alone anymore. Rain poured relentlessly as they stepped inside the massive warehouse. Mrs. Park sat tied to a chair in the center of the room. She looked exhausted but unharmed. Around her stood a dozen armed men. Then another figure emerged from the shadows. Director Kim. He slowly removed his gloves and smiled. Detective Han Seorin, Chairman Kang Ji-ho, you've both exceeded my expectations. Seorin stared at him in disbelief. You planned all of this. Not all, he replied. Just the important parts. Ji-ho stepped forward. Where is my daughter? The director smiled again. Closer than you've ever imagined. He snapped his fingers. A young woman walked into the warehouse. She looked no older than 23. Dark hair, steady eyes, a small crescent-shaped birthmark beneath her left ear. Ji-ho staggered backward. He knew that birthmark. His wife had kissed it every night before putting their daughter to bed. His voice broke. Han-nul? The young woman looked confused. I don't know you. The director laughed softly. Of course she doesn't. She was raised under another name. She spent 20 years believing her parents abandoned her. Ji-ho's knees nearly gave way. Everything he had fought for, everything he had lost, had been standing somewhere in the same country all along. Mrs. Park suddenly shouted, Don't believe another word he says. One of the gunmen struck her across the face, but she kept speaking. He murdered your wife. He stole your daughter. He turned both of you into enemies because he needed control of Han Seorin. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Gunfire exploded from every direction. Ji-ho lunged toward Mrs. Park while Seorin pulled the young woman behind a stack of shipping containers. Bullets shattered windows and ricocheted off steel beams. In the middle of the chaos, Director Kim reached for a hidden pistol and aimed directly at Ji-ho's back. Seorin saw it first. Without thinking, she threw herself forward. The gun fired. Pain exploded through her shoulder as the bullet tore through her body. Ji-ho spun around just in time to see her collapse. Seorin, he shouted, catching her before she hit the ground. Tears filled her eyes as she struggled to breathe. I guess, she whispered weakly, I finally stopped lying to you. Ji-ho held her trembling hand. Don't you dare leave me. Around them, police sirens echoed across the shipyard. This time they weren't answering the director's orders. Deputy Director Lee's confession had been automatically released to every major news organization after his disappearance. The truth was finally public. Officers loyal to the law stormed the warehouse, arresting Director Kim and the surviving members of his conspiracy. The operation that had destroyed countless lives ended not with silence, but with handcuffs. 3 months later, spring returned to Seoul. Seorin stood on the balcony of a rehabilitation center overlooking the Han River. Her shoulder had healed, although the scar remained. Some wounds, she had learned, deserved to stay. They reminded people how far they had come. Behind her, footsteps approached. Ji-ho smiled as he handed her a small envelope. Inside was an old photograph, the same family picture she had found beneath the safe. Only this time, someone had written something new beneath the faded words, Find my daughter. The new message simply read, She came home. Seorin smiled through tears. Down in the garden, Ji-ho's daughter laughed beside Mrs. Park as they planted cherry blossom trees together, making up for 2 decades stolen by lies. Ji-ho gently reached for Seorin's hand. When you first walked into my life, he said quietly, I thought you had come to destroy everything I had left. She looked at him and smiled. Instead, he intertwined his fingers with hers. You gave me back everything I thought I'd lost. Seorin rested her head against his shoulder as cherry blossoms drifted through the warm afternoon breeze. The mission that had begun with deception ended with truth. The man she had been ordered to destroy became the man she chose to stand beside. And for the first time in both their lives, neither of them had to look over their shoulders anymore. If this story reminded you that the truth always finds a way to the surface, no matter how deeply it's buried, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes that love is strongest when it's built on trust instead of lies. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't won by defeating your enemies. They're won by refusing to become like them.